Welcome to Scene Change, a podcast by the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. All about equality, opportunity, accessibility, and the arts. Here, you'll learn adaptive techniques from performers in the know. We are changing what it means to be blind, one stage at a time. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scene Change. My name is Lizzy Muhammad Park, and I am the Vice President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division and the host of the show. This is our March issue, and we've brought 4 experienced marching band performers. They're joining us today from various states, and they play various instruments. We have Miso Kwak, who lives in Massachusetts and has been playing the flute since the 4th grade. She was in band, marching band that is, all 4 years of high school and has 2 years of being a section leader. She was a member of the American National Honor Band and has been involved with the National Federation of the Blind in several ways. She's passionate about educating the youth and has been involved in our Youth Slam program in previous years. She's also a 2013 National Scholarship winner. Welcome to the show, Miso.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next up, we have Emily Keel, who is from Ohio. She currently plays the tuba for her college marching band, and she'll tell us more about that in just a minute. But she started out playing the saxophone in middle school. She's a member of the National Association of Blind Students. She's on the board for the Ohio Association of Blind Students and is a 2020 scholarship winner. Congratulations, Emily.
Thanks, and I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Next up, we have also from Ohio, Kenchuk Tella. He's been playing and performing for the last 7 years. Now, he plays some pretty cool instruments, including the tuba and a couple of others, which I've never heard of. So I'm excited to learn more about them. He's played in several ensembles and is the president of the Ohio Association of Blind Students, in addition to secretary for his local chapter. Hey, Kenchuk.
Hi, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And last but most certainly not least, we have Seun Choi from Missouri. He has played several instruments, including the keyboard, the triangle, and the flute, and was in marching band for 4 years of high school. He is the co-chair for the Outreach Committee of the National Association of Blind Students, NABS, and is a board member for the Missouri Association of Blind Students. He's also on our podcast team and was a big part of putting together today's show. Thank you for all your work, Seun.
Thank you so much, and happy to be here.
Awesome. So, we have quite the combination of instruments, states, and experiences. I'd love to hear from each of you what your earliest memory was of, it could be any instrument or the instrument that you play for band. What made you say that you wanted to play that specific instrument? Did you see someone playing it? Did you hear it and think that it, sounds just so beautiful? What was it about your instrument that made you just want to go for it?
So I started playing saxophone back in middle school, and I played saxophone and oboe all through high school. And so that's what I marched in high school as well for marching band. I think my earliest memory of saxophone would be sitting in my middle school band room probably. And I was really small in middle school. I probably wasn't 4 feet tall. And my band director gave me a Barry saxophone because there weren't any Barry saxes. And it was just middle school band, so obviously it didn't matter too much. But she was like, here, have this. And it was bigger than I was. But it was fun, and I played Barry sax in one of the honor bands in high school. And then for tuba, which is my main instrument now, I switched my senior year, at the end of my senior year, because when I signed up for college band, they're like, we need more tubas. And so they went to the saxophones because there was an army of saxophones, and so we'll take some of you if you want to switch to tuba and just try something new. And so I was like, might as well go for it, and I love it. So it's a super good time.
Wow. And how about for you, Misa? What's your earliest memory?
Okay, so earliest memory that I have about my flute playing is actually with Korean traditional flute. I grew up there in South Korea for some time, and I played Korean traditional flute like starting in the last year of like kindergarten. I think it was one of kind of extracurricular classes that were offered in like my local community, and I actually had a super hard time making even the sound out of it, but I somehow got around to doing that, and then I thought that was pretty fun, and but it kind of didn't really last me like long. Once that class was over, I didn't really play, and yeah, then I was learning the violin at one point at the school for the blind that I used to go to, and I was really bad at it. And the teacher who was teaching me the violin was also the school band director. And once he said that my hands were big enough, he said, "Why don't you try some wind instruments? It actually might be a better fit for you." So yeah, I have longer story than that, but in short, that's how I started picking up the wind instrument. And because I had that earlier memory of playing the Korean traditional one, I decided to play the flute, and that's been my main instrument since then.
Wow. And Kinchuk, how about for you?
Yeah, so my journey with music especially begun in middle school as well. In sixth grade, I ended up taking band class in order to avoid art class because I really didn't like art. And I picked actually trombone initially, and the reason why I picked trombone is because tried it out. I could make a sound out of it, sort of, and it had no buttons. It had a slide, so I thought, oh, very easy, just slide it around. Can't be too hard. Well, I ended up being very bad at trombone, and I was very close to quitting at the end of my sixth grade year until my band director introduced me to the baritone, which is essentially also a low brass instrument, but has buttons instead of a slide, and also no valves. And so I tried that out, and I really ended up liking it. I liked the feel of it, the way it plays, and so I stuck with band throughout middle school, and eventually got really passionate about it. Really enjoyed it, and that kind of jump started my music interests in high school and post high school.
Wow. And Seyun?
So I think I have an earful story. So, okay. My experience with music begins with when I was around the age of 4. Actually, it was from my distant, I believe it was my aunt, on my dad's side that I was, she donated a acoustic piano. So we were able to bring the piano into our apartment. At this time, I was also in South Korea, like Misa was. Um, and I expressed a very deep interest in piano. I would come home and then spend 7 or more hours sitting in front of the piano trying to make sound out of it. Obviously, you have the keys, you press on the keys, it will instantly make notes. It was until I was 5 or 6, I picked up various songs I heard on TV, and I was beginning to mimic how those sound. And my curious mother decided to do some web searching to understand why do I have the ability to do this. And turns out I have a perfect pitch, which is a technical term, which is not a technical term for absolute pitch, where I could distinguish notes based on what I hear. So anything I hear revolves around pitch, which is slightly irritating. And it was just that turning point in my life when I learned a little bit more about that perfect pitch myself, that music is something I was gifted with. So I tinkered with some other instruments in between. I've also received private piano lessons. I've learned a traditional flute as well. It was a wooden one. And when I immigrated to the States in 2012, my mom asked about whether I wanted to join a string orchestra or a band. And that's when I said I would like to join the band because I had no clue about either one of these really specifically because I was so new to the school system here, so I was really focused on that. And my mom offered to see if I would be interested in a flute because of the tone, the beautifulness of the tone, and how easy it would be. Or she assumed it would be easy to pick up, which I was able to make a sound out of it during the beginning band and picked up on notes pretty quickly. And later through the band, I continued to play the flute, and then went back to where my home instrument was, which was the piano. And then my junior year, I transferred into front ensemble, which is the pit of the band, which I'm sure we will talk about later and throughout the episode. And I picked up the lead soloist role my senior year.
That is so cool. And yes, we will get to some more detailed aspects of band in just a minute here. But first, I'd like to know what adaptive techniques you use to learn your instrument. And I mean, it seems like all of you have experience playing several instruments. So if you'd like to get into the differences between how you've learned to play, or whether it's private lessons or learning by ear, and what really worked for you.
Yeah, so for context, I do have some remaining vision on the legally blind spectrum. So initially, throughout my education and band class especially, I was very much orientated to using traditional printed materials, which is very much enlarged. And so I'd have these like giant packets of sheet music that would be ridiculously big on like a ring. I'd like flip through them trying to, and it worked sort of, but it wasn't very efficient. So ultimately I ended up just just spending countless hours in my parents' basement, just listening over and over again to the piece we were playing, whatever it was, and just trying to memorizing it by ear, in conjunction with the sheet music, which I would like memorize upon reading it over and over again, very meticulously. And so that's the main way I kind of did it. It wasn't super efficient, but it took a lot of time and energy, but the love of passion. But ultimately, I ended up, being able to distinguish pitches. Now, I don't have perfect pitch. I wish I did. Quite jealous of you, Sayun. But I was able to like really understand what a B flat sounds like, for example, and like when I hear that pitch or whatever on the piece I'm playing, I'm able to tell, okay, that's a B flat, and also knowing the key and time signature of the piece also helps very much. So it's taking all these little bits and pieces like a puzzle and kind of putting it together, but ultimately it takes a lot of time and work and just repetition to get it down.
So did you kind of teach yourself? It sounds like you just kind of went in the basement and learned by ear.
Yeah, basically, yeah, I pretty much just self-taught. I never took private lessons. I considered it, but in a way, felt like I would be my own best teacher, and it worked out generally.
Wow, that's really cool. Now, Miso, I know that you said that you've had lessons. So one question that I'm curious about for you more specifically is the differences between taking lessons here and taking lessons in South Korea. And, if there were any techniques that were different or if it was exactly the same. And also what sort of worked better for you as the student.
Yeah, for sure. So I also have taken, so my first music lesson was actually involving piano as well, similar to Taeyoon. And I've had multiple piano teachers growing up until from the time I started, and then I eventually quit piano regrettably. But at one point I was really lucky to have a piano teacher who was a mom of one of my classmates at the School for the Blind that this friend and I used to attend. And she taught herself Braille music code and then taught her daughter and her friends, including myself, how to read Braille music. So I learned the basics of like reading Braille music and then learning piano that way. I think in early years of my elementary school. So by the time I picked up the flute, that was also the time that I started quitting piano. But I had the Braille music skills on hand, and the band director at the School for the Blind, who was also like not only directing the band but also giving all the students some lessons, and he would sometimes braille the parts, or sometimes he would teach us just by recording and then just like sitting down and teaching us like at real time. So it was a combination of things. And then when I came to the States, I was in the 7th grade, and really band was really the only class that I could like fully participate, since my English wasn't as good at the time. But the catch here was that I no longer had access to Braille music. So I then started learning all by ear. And that kind of continued until when I reached high school, and at one point the music got so hard that I couldn't just pick up my parts by listening to it. So then I actually worked with my TVI and other teachers to make sure that I got my parts brailled. And in terms of lessons, so the really private lessons for flute, I started taking it in middle school here in the States. And so the private lesson was both combination of sometimes band music, but mainly it was learning like solo repertoire. And I was at one point seriously considering to major in music. So, that was mainly reason like why I took the lessons, because I wanted to like enhance my playing and work up to college audition level. So yeah, I think I don't know like the difference per se, but I think having had that experience of playing in an ensemble with just other blind students and with a teacher who has been who had been teaching at the school for like almost 30 years by that point, versus like now being in a school where I was the only blind student in my band, and having to work with my teachers to make sure that they knew how I learned, that sort of thing. I think that was the main difference.
Did you end up playing in college at all, or?
Yeah, I did play in college. I'm not in marching band, but I did, and I did a major in music, but I did continue to play mainly through the chamber ensemble program. And also another long story, but I was very lucky to have been able to take some lessons with a professor at my university for a few years when I was there.
I see. And so Yun, how about you? What's your experience as far as adaptive techniques for, your marching band instruments? And then also if there are any differences. And I know you're pretty young when you were taking lessons in Korea, but if there's any differences that you remember.
My earliest memory that I have receiving a private lesson was when I was around 7, 6. My mom knew of a friend at church, actually, I went to in Korea. And she worked with other kids with disability, not specifically blind kids, but just kids with disabilities in general. And she was very passionate. She was actually a pianist for the church, and she was willing to volunteer her time after service to give me a lesson and hear lessons here and there. So I picked up basic techniques as a 7, 8 year old, and then I moved to more of a direct piano lesson with different instructors. I can't quite say all of my lessons have been a positive experience in terms of working through adaptations, but they understood that I had a perfect pitch. So I would thrive in an environment where I learn off of the ear. But obviously, I had enough usable vision at this point to. So we ended up installing a light fixture that brightened in front of the music stand that's on the piano, so I could see the music in a darker environment, because my vision really depends on light source. And at the time, I wasn't really using a large print because I had enough vision to see the normal size music. But when I came to the States, I quickly moved. When I picked up flute, we went to a large print music, like Kinshuk was saying. It was a thick packets. Each piece would have at least 5 or 6 pages that I would have to flip through. It was a horizontal like orientation. We're supposed to vertical like 8.5 by 11 piece of book or sheet music. So it was a larger packet to carry around, and for me that served more as a reference to see the dynamic markings, the breath marks, and then that I catch all of those. But most of my parts I was able to pick up pretty fluently by ear. I just had to do a lot of repetition, spend some time outside of band class just keeping up with my parts. And in high school, as the music got more sophisticated, my vision, this is the point where my vision rapidly kind of dropped from a 23/2400 spectrum almost down to none and nothing practical and usable. So that was by the end of my freshman year. So I dropped using large print music completely, and ended up picking everything up by ear. And then my band director served a huge advocate role in making sure that he talks to the composers and the arrangers to make sure that my marching band pieces come through in audio, and I get a slower version of the recording that has all the dynamic markings and the breath mark. So he was very proactive and kind of at making sure that my materials are adapted in terms of just learning the music. So that was really helpful. And when I took a lead soloist role, I spent almost 3 4 hours each day just staying after school trying to learn my piece. So because I practically started the show and ended the show, and I wanted to make sure that I not making any mistakes.
Gotcha. And Emily, how about you? What's your experience as far as adaptive techniques and marching band?
So in the same way as Sayun and Kendrick, I had enough vision to read large print music for most of high school, and then recently I've lost a lot of vision, so it makes it way harder. And I use XML files. So this is like my favorite thing to share because nobody ever told me. I just sort of fell on this one day. Is that you have XML files which you can export from Finalia or Sibelius or any of those music editing programs if you have access to like the music editing version of that piece, and you can export it as an XML file, and you can turn it into you can just upload it into a free music editor like Noteflight is one that I use, or like the free version of MuseScore, stuff like that, and just listen to it on repeat so you can learn it that way. Yeah, I started piano lessons when I was really little because my mom is a professional opera singer. So she went to school to be a musician and a music teacher, and she was very adamant that me and my sister start piano lessons and have music as part of our lives when we were little. And so I stuck with it, and then I joined band in 6th grade after I decided I did not want to play piano anymore, which I kind of regret a little bit, but I also love band very, very much. And I use like big, large print packets, just the same thing as everybody else has been describing, really just pages and pages of blown up music. You just have to keep flipping through them or scrolling on my iPad, just, scroll to the next page and play a little bit and scroll. Same thing in high school pretty much, but it was much harder when the music got complicated. So after a while, you just start memorizing stuff. You just have to play it so much that you memorize it because it's just easier that way. And then recently, reading music has been super frustrating and is definitely a pain point in band. Is learning music, because when there aren't any recordings of the piece, then there's no recording of anything to go off of. Like one of the pieces we're playing in band right now doesn't have any videos of it online. It was just a piece that the directors found in the back room that they wanted to play. So I have nothing to go off of. And I'll probably record somebody else playing it in class and listen back to it just over and over again until I have it memorized, and then I guess go from there. So just recordings help me the best since I can listen to something and play it pretty well. That's just my personal way of going to it.
Wow, it sounds like you might have to start taking some Braille music lessons or something, because That is true. That's something that I hear about a lot on the show is that um, learning by ear works until it doesn't. And like, I know that you play in marching band in college, right?
I do, yeah. I'm in marching band, and luckily for most of those, we've had XML files, and I play tuba. So
Yeah.
luckily, my parts aren't that hard. But when it does start getting difficult, and when I'm playing saxophone or oboe, especially, it is really hard to learn all that and make sure you get everything right when there's all those notes.
Wow. So we're going to move into a slightly different section. Kinchuk, could you tell us, now you belong to several ensembles, could you tell us, for our listeners who maybe are not band aficionados, what the significance of an ensemble is within the band?
Yeah, so within the whole like band community, there are several types of ensembles. You have a traditional concert band ensembles that are simply the traditional ensembles to where it's just either an orchestra or not orchestra, but a wind ensemble. Everyone sits down in their chairs and plays traditional type music, classical type music. But then you also have the marching arts area of it, where it's your marching bands, your drum corps, your college show bands, and newly there's a category called WGI Wins. It's essentially like from this organization called Winter Guard International. It's an indoor competitive winter season for color guard type groups, and there's a new division that was founded in 2014, I believe, where they are allowing wind players to kind of join and create their own ensembles within this scope, where it's kind of like, the way I describe it is like a combination of dance plus wind instruments plus color guard. So it's a lot more active and more visual type art, but just as much musical as a concert band would be.
That's excellent. And how many of those do you belong? Do you belong to two, three?
So currently I'm performing with one WGI Winds ensemble. And I was also part of my college marching band this past fall. But as of right now, I'm just performing within one ensemble.
I see. Now, you brought up a really good point that I want to jump into, and that is choreography and the visuals of performance. I'm going to turn this one over to Emily because I know she has a lot of experience with this kind of thing as well. Emily, you've been in marching band for a while. How have you dealt with choreography?
So I'm actually in the same WGI Wins group that Kinchuk is in. So we both have to learn choreography in the same way. And so obviously communication is really important. So I'm a pretty open book. And so I just let everybody know, hey, I might look like I can see you, but I can't see you. That sort of thing, just putting it out there. So that has helped me in a lot of places where somebody will come and do the choreography near me or just explain it better and correct me if I'm doing something wrong. So if they can put it into terms that I understand, so that I can follow along and explain the movements well, and then correct me while I am doing it, that seems to work the best.
Mm-hmm. And do you do the same thing, Kinchuk?
Yes, generally, yeah. Also, like to add on to that, so a lot of the choreography that we do use is a lot of stuff based out of ballet fundamentals. So I was fortunate enough to have a high school that had a WGI Wins program. So I had the experience of learning like the very fundamentals of ballet and dance, and the way choreography works in the marching arts is simply building or combining those different aspects like pliés and rond de jambes, for example, or tendus. And so because I already had this kind of knowledge in my head of like how to do these movements very well, I'm able to like kind of piece together and I guess learn it a lot quicker now than I used to, especially competing now in an independent organization with Emily. And so it really does help having that foundational knowledge, but also yeah, great communication is always really good and helpful. Clear descriptions and people are always willing to help, especially the people in our section. They're great people. So they always come close to us and like show us right in front of us, or they'll point out different things we're not doing that are needed to be done. So yeah.
Now, Sayun, I know that is not your experience, right?
My freshman and sophomore year, I didn't get to participate too much in the halftime per se, but I did march with the flute section. And during, at least in my high school, there was a specific movement we had to do with our instrument to look uniform. And then it was each to highlight each section. And then in order for me to learn that, I first had to know my marching technique, which obviously is a very kind of important role if you're standing like. So we went on in twos. So you would have a player to your right or to your left at all times, and the person that was marching was always great about letting me know their upcoming like pending hazards if there's like a dip or a slope down going into the football field or the stadium, or whether I need to raise my instrument, or whether I'm deviating from the rest of the line. So, yes, there was a little bit of kind of a walking straight issue. However, I think it was ironed out pretty easily. Just knowing your place in distance relative to kind of people around you was kind of my key to being successful when we marched down to the field and off on and off the field. And then when we made an arc before we performed something like God Bless America or Star Spangled Banner. In those instances, someone was always ready to kind of jump in. And even my band director, my assistant band director, was ready to jump in, and I get stood in the right kind of quadrant of the arc that we formed, with the color guard kind of centered in the middle, and the band, we would surround the color guard and the dance team or cheer team or whatever, whatnot. And really, other than that, in college, obviously, so my college doesn't have a marching band, so most of what I'm doing, I'm back to flute and doing concert band, and then that's just have been a sit down band. So there's really nothing much to add there.
I see. And Miso, what's your experience as far as marching band and choreography?
Yeah, so I think I have a unique experience here in that my high school, where I went to two different high schools. So the second high school, I did the most of my marching band there. So 3 years, 3 seasons there. So that second high school was doing mostly parade bands. So I think it's pretty unique to where I went to high school, which is Southern California. And so our competition would be like marching down the street, and like we were judged on how precise our movements or how good our music was. It's very like militaristic kind of activity. So there was not so much choreography involved in that, since it's like a straight like military style marching. But I did have to learn like good posture and good distance, like what is the right step size, that sort of thing. So one thing that my band as a whole did for like kind of that making sure that we learned the marching technique was one was we had what we called step med. I don't know if that's an actual thing, but if or somebody just like made it. So there was like we would have a like long mat, and then we would like lay down like a stick of sort in the right spot. So the idea was that you're like a ball of the foot, like you would have to touch that when and if you're doing that, then you're getting the right step size. So since that was pretty tactile, I was able to learn that, and then I would borrow one like for the season and bring it home and put it in my backyard, and I would just practice it sometimes at home too. And then yeah, and then the times that I did have to learn choreography for like our halftime show, I had like people, like I would ask my marching band coach. We had a coach who was like helping us learn those things. And then so I would go after rehearsal like to ask like, can you explain that again? Can you tell me if I'm doing this correctly or not? And yeah, can you just help me with that? And he was very good at doing that. And mainly I had somebody who was helping me like by putting their hand on my shoulder. So flute is a long instrument that extends out to the right. So somebody could stand on my left side and put their hand on my shoulder. And my band was huge. My high school band had like 300 kids in it. So we had more people than like the spots. So some like students were alternates, or like students would take turns guiding me. So that's how I got around like managing the kind of visual and precise parts of it.
So as far as the guide, they would kind of stand off to your left with just like a hand on the shoulders to sort of like direct you and like tell you which way to go.
Yeah, and this person would also, say like, oh, and since, when we're actually competing, we don't have that anything to like tactile to guide how we are doing. And then we have to kind of also make sure that we are marching as a block. It's not just about me, right? The whole marching band is the group. So sometimes, they'll say like, oh, like we're slowing down, or like smaller steps or bigger steps. And so verbal cues, which were really helpful.
So you and someone else, and I don't remember who it was, but someone else on the panel mentioned audio and guides who use audio. Now, if they are playing an instrument, say like a wind instrument, how do they give audio in those instances? Or would they purposely
this person wouldn't play. This person would be only guiding.
Gotcha.
Like I said, we had more people than the spots. So usually it would be like younger students who would be guiding me, since they're new to the band and whatnot. So, and they took turns so that they had opportunities to march. But it was usually like 2 or 3 people that that I had like that were good at guiding, and that was like a good fit to work with me. So yeah, and they weren't playing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So another thing that we did was like put books on our head to march, and then if the book fell down, then you knew you didn't have the good posture. So that was an exercise designed for like everyone, not specifically blind students in mind, but obviously like it was something that I could also figure out, like, okay, how is my head posture? So yeah, that was also helpful.
Yeah, that's always a great exercise for having really good posture. And I know they do that a lot in dance, like ballet and things like that too. Who was the other person on our panel who mentioned having a guide?
When we had to do parade band and stuff, I used to just put my hand on either the person in front of me or the person to the side of me when we didn't have to play in parade band. So in parade band, if we were just walking to the stadium or something, just to stay in line, because walking straight is an issue sometimes.
Yeah, I feel that. So were you playing so you said you were not playing at this time. So it appears that in band there's going to be times, I guess, when you're playing and marching, and other times when you're just marching. Is that right, Emily?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. And during the times when you're just marching, you'll just put your hand on the person in front of you or beside you. Now, what happens when you are playing and marching?
You have to listen to who's around you. Everybody here will understand what I say when I say that you can hear who's next to you, or if there's a person next to you, just because you can hear shadows, that sort of deal. Yeah. So when you're marching like that, you really have to refer to like your left side parallel almost, or right side parallel, I guess, whichever one. But listen to who's next to you, and then if you can gauge the space between you and them, you can stay in line, because usually it's you're in a grid pattern for parade band. For drill, it's a whole different story. For drill, you just have to memorize your direction changes almost. There was a lot of memorizing direction changes and prayer that goes on when you're blind and on a marching field. So there's 2 different kinds of marching.
Could you tell us what the difference is? between parade and drill? I'm assuming that drill is on an open field and parade is not.
Yeah, parade would be like when you're actively going somewhere. Usually if you're in a formation and walking somewhere like up to the stadium or just doing a parade sort of deal. And then drill would be the pictures you make during a halftime show or during a competition show that isn't in a specific formation, that your sets change um with everybody else's and it's not the same shape.
Now I know what a formation is because I was a cheerleader back in middle school. But Sayun, could you explain to any audience members who do not know what a formation is? Could you tell them what it is and possibly even give maybe an example?
Sure. So formation would, in the marching band context, right? Because there's different context and the contextual cues that the word formation gives to. So when I think of formation in the marching band, it's usually in a halftime show. Kind of piggybacking off of Emily's point. So in a halftime show, as a flute player, for example, each player would have a dot book or some sort of marking device to indicate their position in conjunction with the football field marking. So 40-yard line, 50-yard lines. That's really when you understand a little bit about how football fields are designed, not even knowing how the sport even works. Just understanding that is a big piece of when you do formation. So that kind of ties in with the choreograph sort of kind of movement. So how does horn angles work? How do you position yourself? How do you have to present yourself in a and have the form to have that display? So like certain shows, like the recently completed show my senior year was themed to Nowhere Man, and that involved a pretty physical movement to line up with the color guard and the theme that we're going for, which for us it was picture frames, and so we had to place picture frames all over the football field, and then it was kind of like a reincarnation of this of the dead soul, and then that's kind of what we're trying to display, and for that we had to have a horn angle with our instruments, obviously marchers, and then where are you facing, like, so for I feel obviously blind marchers, I think it would really help, and even for sighted marchers, knowing where the scoreboard is, which way is your stadium, where's the front of the field, where's your stands, are you facing north, south, east, or west? So I think that's really how I could best explain formation in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. And Kenchuk, Sayun did a really good job of describing different ways to orient yourself to the field. Do you have anything to add maybe about safe formations and how loud it can be on the field and other ways of maintaining orientation?
Yeah, so when it comes to sound staging on a football field, it's very tricky because it's such a big, vast of land. And so, as you know, like sound travels slower than light, so naturally there's delays. So when a drum plays a note at the at yard 50, and you're maybe standing on the goal line, there's gonna be a delay there, of course. And so, with orientating yourself, what helped me a lot is just like knowing which instruments are where at what time. So, for example, the front ensemble, also known as the pit, is like the group of instruments that's usually at the front of the field. Although nowadays bands are being edgy and like changing it up a little bit, like adding, like putting them other places in the field. But traditionally, they're at the front of the field. These are your, the xylophones, marimbas, like stationary equipment that are, they don't move. And so if you can hear those sounds and understand like, oh, I hear the xylophone, so that means that side is, the front of the field. You can orientate your body based on those sounds, and even if it's delayed, you can still, tell. And traditionally, likewise, the drum line is usually in the back, not always, but generally behind like the horns. So what really helped me was kind of like orientating myself between the drum line and the front ensemble. And just like that, if you kind of know generally where in the show you are in regards to what instruments are around you at the time, it helps you. So for example, if the tubas are on the left side of the field at this particular set, you can kind of orientate yourself based on that. But of course, that takes a lot of work as to like understanding the show and the design of the show and how, where's what and what's happening when, because In a marching band show, there's always 1,000 things happening at once.
Yeah, they're very intricate in terms of visuals, sound, and I mean everything else. It sounds like from what you were just describing, it seems like though the stadium, is quite large and there are a lot of things going on. It seems like you can when you're on the field, you can still hear like you're still able to differentiate uh, relevant and necessary sounds or the sounds that you need in order to maintain orientation. Is that right?
Yeah, generally, yes, even though there's a delay. Now, when it comes to understanding your tempo, like the pace of the music, that's a different story because traditionally performers use the conductor as a reference of time, right? As a blind marcher, that's not going to be of any use. So that takes a different kind of skill set.
That's actually what I was just about to jump into. I'm going to hop over to Miso real quick. Miso, how did you know when to start when you were on the field, with the sound delays and all these different situations, the people around you also playing and, how do you know when to start the music?
Usually we would have drum major who is a person who's usually in the field show type experience, like standing on a tall like a ladder, and then usually they would yell out things like bent 10 head and things and other commands. So that was definitely one cue that I relied on, like the drum major's whistles and whatever the drum major was giving us, like commanding us to do. So that was one. And then I think for a lot of pieces, usually percussion, the drum line would start, or so I think that was also I used as much musical cues as possible. And I think when that was not possible, I think I may have had to just come in very slightly late and then just go with the flow as soon as I caught up to that. I mean, we're talking I don't know, very slight delays, but so I think to sum up, use the drum major's commands and then any other musical cues, such as who starts what, that sort of thing. And then obviously knowing your music. And I think that's just the same thing as if you're playing indoors or outdoors. And then when needed, just when you're when your instrument starts that music and then there's no sound cue whatsoever for whatever reason, then maybe having dealing with that slight delay and just keeping up with it.
No, that's what I was thinking. I was just in my head when I was thinking of a technique that I would have probably used if I was in marching band. All of those sound like really good ones, especially I could very much see myself being the kind of person to just take just a quick second and then hop in maybe with the second note instead of jumping in right away and possibly coming in so early or so late. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. Emily, what did you do as far as knowing when to come in? Was your experience the same or was it a little different?
Pretty similar. I you know when to come when you know the music. A thing that helped me for cues and stuff is when I guess this was more for concert band, when directors had drumsticks and clicked for entrances and stuff like that, for cues, not during a piece or anything like that. But as far as seeing the conductor's hands, obviously there was none of that, but just knowing the music and having it memorized.
And how about for you, Sayun?
So for me, this is a very interesting one
I
because
thought so.
when I returned back to kind of my senior show where I was a lead soloist, so when I say I was a front ensemble member, a pit member, as Kinchuk was describing earlier, I was stationary, so I did not march for the halftime shows. I was near the stands, I was near the electronics, I was near other percussion instruments, but as a keyboardist and being a soloist, I had a role of starting the show and finishing up the show, which meant so the keyboard kind of has two components to it. There's the piano, but because it is electronic, I could produce other synthesized sounds, and so that involves a little bit more technology aspect of things. So because I was so close to the podium where the drum major is on, We actually, I actually counted off after they gave a set command to get the band ready. So typically in a competition setting or the halftime show setting, the microphone will announce, is the band ready, is a drum ranger ready. So we'll go through that two-step kind of process. Once the band was ready to begin, I gave them a hand signal to let them know I'm ready to go. My electronics are ready to go. My speakers are hooked up. My amplifiers are hooked up because I'm making 7 or 8 different connections to make sure my sounds are coming through the stadium speakers and audio systems. So while I'm working on that, the rest of the pit is getting set up. The band is getting set up. Um, Not to mention, this has to be done typically within a 5-6 minute window. So in a competition setting, that is much, much tighter. So I'm focusing on getting the wires connected to make sure my keyboard is powered on, because we had an inclement weather situations before where some cables and outlets circuits got shorted out. So making sure I have those extra cables at hand, audio cables. Once that is ready to go, I'll give them a hand signal as I mentioned earlier, and then we start at 60 beats per minute. And I would crank on I think it was like a sweeping sound effect that started the show. So I would put that pad on, and when I say pad, it's a set of chords that plays while the melody is happening. So I would crank that on, switch the mode, and then I would play my part. And then we are going from 60 to 144 BPM. So as the band comes in, I fade out my part. The band comes in and plays. And then at the end of the movement, I will come back in with my synthesized part and then going back down to 60. So with a lot of tempo changes, obviously I didn't have an audible cues to rely on, but I was very attentive with the drum major to make sure that we have a communication in place, whether that be me just kind of moving my upper body as gently as you possibly could. So it's invisible cues. So if we're going 60 beats per minute, I'm going to sway my body from left to right to indicate the tempo we're coming back down to. And I'll give them a cue as we go into set movement 2. That's starting, I believe, at 124, 125 beats per minute, and that's a different set of kind of commands I'm executing all at once. And then when we went on the third movement, obviously there was a different set of tempo for that. So when we kind of go through those shows, sets, I just had to communicate with the drum major to adjust accordingly with the settings I'm managing on the keyboard itself, the synthesizer, and where we're going to wrap up and finish.
That was a really good description. Thank you for that. So Kenchuk, back to you. I'd like to know about the college audition process, and Emily, you'll be up next. As far as marching band goes, so would you be required to do any choreo or physical marching in order to get into the ensemble, or into the band, or is it largely just focused on your music ability and ability to play the instrument?
So I'm actually not a music major. I'm a science major. So I did not go through the college audition process to get into the music school. And my college marching band actually does have an audition process, but it's very minimal and like pretty much no one gets cut. It's a very low stakes type of ensemble. But I will share an audition experience I had with other organizations. So for example, I have auditioned for, you can say, like the more professional, like competitive type organizations within like drum corps, or also known as DCI or WDI wins. And so with those processes for auditions, it's very much a combination of both. I would say like 50% visual, 50% music. So that they would have you, demonstrate your marching technique, your abilities to be spatial aware, and demonstrate various step sizes and consistency. But at the same time, like music is a big part of it as well. So if you can, there's a common saying in the community where it's like, if you can play it while marching well, you can play it well. It doesn't matter if you can play it standing still. If you can play it while on the move, then it counts. And so, the process was very rigorous, of course, for many of these ensembles competitively. You have to be able to perform music and the visual part of it, which involves choreography many times. I'm sure Emily can attest more to this. I know she has auditioned in far and far more of these ensembles than I have. But a lot of these ensembles require like a dance audition where you're literally like doing a very intensive choreo based dance, and it's very unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Emily, could you share about that? Those audition experiences?
Yeah, sure. So I'm really passionate about drum corps, and hopefully this summer I'll get the chance to march with a DCI corps. So I'm in that audition process right now. And honestly, I'm kind of lucky that it's online this year because we get the ability to, I don't want to say hide a little bit, but get more time to work on some things that you might have to do in person otherwise. So obviously something that scares me coming into an audition room is sight reading, because that's just not a viable option. I can't sight read music without any preparation. So that has been something that I've had to like just let people know about. For our college marching band process, it was sort of what Kinchik was saying. We didn't have like a super rigorous process for the marching band. It was just sort of come in and play something you prepared on your instrument, get to know the directors more so. For drum corps auditions, it's very intensive. It's very much you wake up at 8 a.m. and then you do band, and then you eat lunch and then you do band. And so you practice music in the mornings usually, and then you have a visual block, which is just marching and playing in different drills and stuff, different tempos, just to test what you can do on the fly. So much stuff. Everything just happens so fast at we call them camps, so audition camps.
Yep. So during these times, would you have to, for example, learn choreo, and how would you go about, and just like you talked about a little bit already, any sight reading that you'd have to do, how did you communicate that with, the director and whomever else needed to know?
I have a white cane that communicates. No, really though, it's a good talking point to get to know the director. I've gotten to know the head directors at a lot of corps that I would not have otherwise if I wasn't just coming in and needed no accommodations or anything like that. Yeah, choreography is sort of similar to what we would do in marching band or in any other group that I was in, where you just have to pay attention and listen and ask for clarification if you need it. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification, because likely someone will help you. The hardest part is when you start moving fast and you're trying to listen to like 17 things at once, and you miss a step off and then you're done for. It's happened to all of us. It happens, but you just get back on track, refocus yourself, keep going. You're just listening hard. Obviously, we're living in a sighted world, so sometimes we have to just work 3 or 4 times as hard as everybody else.
Now, Miso, you've also, I'm assuming, did you have to audition for your or for the American National Honor Band? I want to say Honor Society. It's not Honor Society. Did you have to audition for that? And what was that process like?
Yeah, so it was Bands of America National Honor Band that was for the 2013 Rose Parade, which is a big parade that happens in Pasadena, California. So the full story is that I came across a tweet that was calling for like high school students to audition, and I was like, "Oh, this sounds interesting." So let me just audition and see what happens. And actually, the audition process was kind of hard because they were using a software called Smart Music, and I don't think it's still very accessible, but like then it was not accessible at all, like for me to do the stuff that they wanted me to do. So then I had to go talk to them and disclose that I was a blind student, and like, look, the software that you're asking us to use is not accessible. What should we do about that? And so we did come up with just plain CD audition, and so that's how I auditioned and got in. And yeah, so at in that year, my brothers did it 4 years later, and it was slightly different where they had to like submit like a video of them marching and things like that. But when I did it, it was just audio for everyone. So I think, and then they sent us like practice materials like music, and then the kind of, you should do this kind of like marching exercise. But but that was like all done at home, since it was like students around like from like 30 something different states, so we couldn't like gather throughout the year to do this. So with those things, I got help from like my family members to kind of watch the video, and they described the video for me. And then when we showed up, it was kind of like mini drum corps, in that like it was very intense. Like we had a week to prepare for this like set of kind of very widely watched performances. And I'd say it was a kind of a mini core, because I know how like intense the actual like big cores are. One of my brothers did Santa Clara Vanguard, which is like one of the major cores, and like that's like a very intense experience. So like I don't want to say like it was comparable to that. It was not at all, but it was similar in that you had to learn a lot of stuff in a short time, and you're morning to night like band, which I loved, because I mean I signed up for it, right? So but I did have to learn quickly any kind of like movements that we had to learn. And so yeah, that was kind of like my nutshell experience from audition to the performance.
Wow, that sounds really cool. And it just sounds like it was something, really intense too, but fun.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know, and was there a certain band uniform that you had to wear? And if so, could you describe it?
There was not a specific band uniform per se. Everybody wore the same uniform except the drum majors, which was a different outfit to contrast from the rest of the band. If I could try to describe, I feel like I've been in high school forever ago, but it was a red um, gown type material with kind of a sash that went diagonally across the chest with a mirror like reflective kind of element, which I thought it was a really cool look. Obviously, I mean, I'm sure many of you could contest to this, like that the excruciating temperature outside combined with a band uniform is the worst. And our uniforms also had that problem. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. So how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how accessible is marching band for blind performers? And you could add on to that by discussing maybe where it's lacking in accessibility, or if you have ideas to make it more accessible.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would say that marching band is a 10 for accessibility if you're working with the right people, and if you're able to communicate what you need, and the people around you are willing to work with you and get you the right materials. So I've had a really great experience with marching band because I've always had great classmates and great teachers who will jump over the ocean to help me and get me the materials that I need. Whether it's printing out poster sized sheets of music and tacking it to giant pieces of cardboard and setting up myself in an entire corner of the room, or just different types of electronic music files, reaching out to arrangers to have those accessible files, and just having peers on the field who are willing to tell me when I've turned the wrong direction. Stuff like that is all really important and really makes marching band worth it. It might seem small in the moment for the person who's doing it, but it really makes the activity worth it.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emily. It's been really great hearing your insight, and you seem very outgoing, and I think that's been a huge part of your success.
Well, thank you so much.
And Sayun, how about you?
I would also say marching band has been, I think, by far my favorite part of really middle school onward. So I would also give it a 10. I think the reason why I say that is because in high school marching band, for me, the band season really revolved um, so much of my life. And I think it just really your band teachers, your band director, your assistant band director, the color guard director, and the people around you, your sections, your section leaders, become your kind of a family, if you will. There have been many occasions where I stayed after school, where color guard, our my high school had a very impressive color guard, and then they would practice for hours. And obviously, typically on a Friday nights, football game doesn't start till 6 or 7 ish. So I would usually, because of transportation, ended up staying after school. I would practice my parts and chit chat with people that I knew in band, and then over time you get really close. And I think, I don't know if it was just my band, but I took a trip to a Disney World to do a march there at a Magic Kingdom for the parade, and that was just parade. We They played Old Lang Syne, which is like a New Year's themed song, and then we marched throughout the theme park, and it's really special to have that crew of people that share same interest as you are, that are so passionate about music, that are just so passionate about being in the community. And I always felt like there was home in my high school. There was somewhere I belonged. And then when I took my senior leadership role as a music honor society and eventually a soloist, they were kind enough to kind of highlight my story on in the newsletter, because I think it was my school district's first ever. I was a first ever blind marcher that did various kind of roles and took a very active approach, and I really enjoyed that, kind of being part of that group. And I think with right tools, like Emily was saying, you can make anything accessible. And I think music is one of the ways that you can make really things accessible and make it work. And it's a very rewarding experience. And that's why music continues to be kind of, even though I may not be a music major by long shot, it continues to remain as a hobby, and I want to continue to play the flute. And I'm so happy to find the group of you guys that are also blind marchers, that one day we could put it together, a small ensemble of woodwind brass kind of ensemble one day, and then continue to go forward in my college band as well. Just even though it's a little bit of a different experience, but you always feel like you're part of something, and you're making something you like, music that is really rewarding. And I really have the satisfaction when I play my instrument. It's like you can escape from reality and just play your heart out.
Thank you so much. That would be so cool to have an all blind marching band. We gotta make that happen. But we really enjoyed your detailed descriptions today. They have been amazing and really going to be helpful to our listeners, especially or specifically our blind listeners who may not have seen some of these things before. You've done a really great job of making everything easy to picture, as far as mental images go. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Kinchuk, how about you? How accessible is marching band and why?
Yeah, so I will just first off say that I 100% agree with everything Emily and Sayun have said so far. Like, music is a very rewarding experience, especially in a marching band. So there's such a tight knit community, and it's been very rewarding, especially throughout high school. And so, with that, I'll also give marching band a 10. And, I will say though, like, the marching arts in general, it's a very diverse, very different activity from your traditional activities. But within the activity, there's so many different variations. You have your halftime entertainment show bands, to your, you know, professional, cutthroat type, high pressure environments like drum corps. Um, and so, but within all those different environments, like, there's a commonality in that such a tight knit community. And like Emily was saying, like, the right the right people will make a huge difference. And I've had the same experience too, fortunately, where my directors did not, didn't really care that I had accommodations. They loved that I was passionate about the music, and if I was willing to work for it, they're willing to help me with it. And from serving as a member, freshman member, to eventually being in leadership roles later in high school, like it's very rewarding, especially when you're taking an active role, like Saeed said.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kenchuk. You've definitely shown all of us the extent to which hard work really can pay off. I've personally enjoyed hearing your thoughtful responses to each question, and it's cool that you taught yourself pretty much how to play these instruments, and then you've been able to jump into doing band, taking on leadership roles, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much. It's been lovely having you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really enjoyed hearing about the experiences of everyone else here, and it's very cool to see that other people just like me are doing the same exact kind of activity.
And Miso, how about you? On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I know what you're going to say because everybody's been giving it 10s, but you don't have to. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how accessible is marching band and why?
So in terms of accessibility score, I think I would probably give, I don't know, like solid B plus, so like 8, 8.8, 9, maybe 9. And the reason why I say that is I think inherently marching band is a visual activity. It like I can't just show up to some like drum corps show or like field show competition and expect myself to fully enjoy the show without someone describing what's going on in the field. And like I don't think I can do this like independently, right? Like like learning how to march and learning, making sure that I'm in line all the time, like my posture is good all the time, right? I need help from somebody to make sure, like as nearly totally blind person, like it's marching band is a visually inherent activity. That said, I can give a like pretty high score in the accessibility scale in the 1 to 10 because like everybody else already said, it's really what you make out of it, and I think it's really up to you as a person and like how determined you are to make things work. But also like it's also up to like people around you, so like band directors and then your classmates in the band or your bandmates, I guess in college or like outside of school setting. If people are willing to make things work and collaborate, I do think it's very, very accessible. I don't think the kind of visual nature of marching band should stop you from not trying at all, because one of my favorite quotes from my high school band director is not trying is tragic, because you wouldn't know without trying how things will work out. But in terms of my experience, I would like everyone else, I would give 10 out of 10, and honestly 10 plus out of 10, because I think I learned a lot about work ethic, collaborating with others, self-advocacy, like all these skills that we talk a lot about within the blindness community, and specifically like what NFB talks about a lot. I think those skills I gained a lot from band, and specifically like making sure that I was able to participate in marching band. And like everyone else already said, like the sense of belonging, the camaraderie, like community, like all those things are very just good things to experience. And I think now, like looking back at my high school experience, like I think I'm a pretty like okay, like decent, good person, like largely because of like all the lessons that I've learned from being in marching band. So that's my comment to your question.
Sure. And thank you so much for joining us today and really enriching this episode with a fresh perspective. I know I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure that our listeners will as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was just great to be with you all and share my experience.
Well, that's our show for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to our panelists. As always, thank you to our producer, Shane Lowe, and I'll see you in April.
I'm Caitlin McIntyre, President of the National Federation of the Blind Performing Arts Division. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Scene Change. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website at nfb-pad.org. There you'll find links to our social media, membership, and resources for blind performers. Thanks to everyone who makes this show happen. Scene Change is produced by Shane Lowe, Chris Nussbaum, Seun Choi, and Precious Perez, with music by Ryan Strunk and Tom Page. Remember, you can be the performer you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. We'll see you next time.